we have here The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And start by saying it would have been good to have read Tom Sawyer before that one, but it's not necessary completely. But if you had read Tom Sawyer, you would get a good idea of who Huck was before this. So he was basically a homeless kid, a street urchin, a gutter snipe, and he lived in the woods and the pig pens and stuff like that. And he was just like a poor homeless kid. And throughout the adventures of Tom Sawyer, they find a buried treasure. He comes into a lot of money, and he gets a home with this old widow. And the adventures of Huckleberry Finn picks up right there where Tom Sawyer left off. And so he's living with this widow, and he resents her trying to civilize him and educate him. He has to wear nice clothes and be clean and take baths and go to school and speak properly. And he hates that. So he resents it. And then his dad finds out that he has all this money. His money's with this judge, and this judge is like stewarding his money for him and investing it. And he can go to the judge and get a little bit of money at a time if he wants to. But he doesn't even want anything to do with the money. But his dad comes into town, and his dad does. His dad wants the money. And so they're trying to get basically guardianship away from his dad and get so the widow can have like legal responsibility for him. But the courts aren't trying to do that. This judge that is taking care of Huck's money doesn't have a role in that. They have a new judge in the town, and he doesn't want to remove him from his father, even though his father isn't around. His father just comes into town to get money from him, to get drunk, and to beat him up. But eventually his dad just takes him, physically just takes him, and basically locks him up in this cabin in the woods. And it's all bad for Huck at that time. So he like fakes his death. He makes like a murder scene in the cabin, and he runs away. And as he's running away, like the first thing he does, he runs into Jim. Jim is a runaway slave who belonged to the widow who Huck is also wanted to get away from. So they join up together, and they're rafting down the Mississippi River together. Jim wants to escape to a free state, and Huck just wants to go away. He wants to escape his father and all of his old life. He just wants to be free. Also, they both are just trying to be free. And so the book, it's written after the Civil War, but it's set before the Civil War. So no doubt that Mark Twain he like grew up in Missouri. It's set in Missouri, St. Petersburg, Missouri. It's a fictional town, but based off of the real town that Mark Twain grew up in. So if you know anything about the Civil War and the role that Missouri played in it, it was it was kind of the center of attention. Yeah, at one point Missouri was kind of the center of attention. They had the Missouri Compromise of 1820 and all this, and John Brown, the radical abolitionist. A lot of things happened in Missouri, but it was a slave state. So it does. Mark Twain does kind of give his commentary on that through Huck Finn and through Jim. Huck is uneducated. He doesn't want to be educated, and he just kind of looks at the world on his terms and his morality and what's beneficial to him. And so he's good friends with Jim. He loves Jim. Jim and him get along famously. They're like best friends. But at the same time, Huck has this conflict in his mind that Jim used to belong to the widow that took care of him when nobody else did. So he kind of has this conflict, like he's kind of stealing from the widow because the widow was going to sell Jim. That's why Jim is running away. The widow's going to sell Jim because she's destitute. She needs the money. She didn't want to, but she kind of had to sell Jim. So they're both running away for these reasons. Huck's trying to escape his dad and basically trying to escape civilization, and Jim is trying to escape slavery and being sold up the river. So, bam, they get into all these kind of misadventures on the river. Huck has to help hide Jim because he would be runaway. So he basically has a bounty, like anybody could capture Jim and turn him in and get the reward. So Huck's helping to hide Jim, and at the same time, Huck has to assume a different identity everywhere he goes because he's faked his death. And he doesn't want anybody to know where he is, for his dad will come and get him. His dad's a bad dude. So they run into these other kind of outlaws, these two dudes, these con artists, and they basically go from town to town scamming the people. So they get mixed up with that, and eventually Huck and Jim have to escape from these dudes. One of the dudes claims that he is the king of France's son, and he escaped France. And this other dude claims that he's a duke from England. And it's total nonsense, but they just kind of play into it because it's just more convenient. Just go along with their nonsense. And eventually it comes to a point where Jim does get captured, and Huck meets back up with Tom Sawyer, and they come up with this elaborate scheme to free Jim from his captors. That's like the last few chapters. It's kind of frustrating to read because it's so elaborate what they think that they need to do. Tom Sawyer's like directing this scheme, and he's just like such an idealist, romanticist. They're children. I think also at the same time it's important to understand that these are children. It's a kid's book written in published in like 1882. It was a kid's book written about these kids, so their thinking and their ideas are very childish, and they think in terms of like storybooks and Robin Hood and stuff like that. So, but it's really interesting. I think it's worth a read, just from the point of it's a social commentary. Twain, he comments on abolition, slavery, church, just society in that time frame that he grew up in, that time and place. And I think for that it's very valuable, just an insight into what people think and the things people say and the ideas that are popular at that time. But yeah, classic piece of American fiction right here. It's worth the read. It's not too long, and it's not quite difficult. Honestly, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer is kind of difficult because the vocabulary that Twain uses is kind of elaborate. It's archaic. They're words that aren't really used anymore, and they're used in ways that aren't used anymore. So Tom Sawyer is actually a little bit more challenging to read, even though it's a lot shorter. Huck is a lot longer, and the challenging thing in the text of it is the vernacular. He writes them into their characters just like a real twangy, how do you describe, like it's phonetic. The way that he writes their dialogue is phonetic, so he writes it as they would say it. But it doesn't have quite the challenging vocabulary that Tom Sawyer has. But yeah, it's a really good book. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn.